What's up, ladies and gentlemen of YouTube? Boogie2988 coming at you live. I was getting through the power of the internet, and this is part 2 of a series in which we take a look at gaming companies that irrefutably damaged their own reputations back in 2019. If you haven't seen part 1, I will link to it probably at a card up here in the description box down below. There's a company not on this list. It's probably on the other one. But before I get started, I do want to go ahead and say that a lot of people in the last video in the comment section were pointing out that I also had a really rough 2019, horribly tarnishing my reputation online. And you aren't wrong. I mean, I don't think I screwed up like a Fallout 76 level of screw up, but hey. But the good news is, a lot of the companies that we looked at in the last video, like BioWare, like Bethesda, they have a chance if they continue to put out good products and continue to serve their community and serve their customer base, there's a very real chance that they will rebound. And I hope the same thing for me. So don't count us out until we actually are out, right? Until BioWare shuts its doors, I'm still rooting for BioWare. So I want to start this list by my biggest omission from the last video, and that is Google Stadia. And Google Stadia already had an uphill battle that it needed to fight to begin with because people are not keen on the idea of streaming the games that they have paid for. Instead of going with a Netflix style model where you pay and play all you want, like Game Pass and PlayStation Now, instead they charge you a monthly fee to access the games that you've chosen to purchase. And whereas that might very well be the future, players are very resistant about that now, pointing out things like data caps and server latency and other issues. And when this system launched, absolutely that was the case. I don't think I saw a single positive review amongst all the Stadia reviews I saw. Pretty much everyone across the board said that this service was bad, and all of the fears people had were true. The games are too expensive, the service wasn't very good. And don't get me wrong, they're working on the service, and they're making it better every single day, but I fear that even if they get this service correct in the next year or two, the brand name Google Stadia is now so tarnished, it doesn't really matter what they do. They would have to offer some extremely low prices and some extremely good free games to get people involved. And I just don't know that if that's going to happen. I mean, I bought Google Stadia. I got the 3 free games they've given away so far. They might have given away another one by now. I just haven't checked in a couple of weeks. And I've used the service, and it works pretty well on my internet. So I would be willing to say that it's a decent service now, just poorly priced. If they ever get the pricing right, it might be a good service to recommend. But people just have such a negative connotation with it at this point. I don't know even if they were giving away $1 million games if anybody would care. Then the folks over at THQ Nordic really screwed up this year because they decided to do a community Q&A, but instead of doing that on a safe website like Twitter or Reddit or maybe even Tumblr, they chose, out of all places, 8chan. And you know, this might have went over okay if they went with 4chan instead of 8chan, because if you're not aware, 4chan is already a very edgy board, but a few years ago they decided to try to clean it up a little bit and get rid of some of the really heinous stuff, and the people who rejected that moved on to 8chan or Infinity Chan, and that is probably one of the most vile boards to exist on the internet. It's got some crazy stuff going on. And look, say what you will about freedom of speech and that kind of thing, but look at this apology on the screen. I'm not even going to read this out loud, but if you've made such a mistake that you have to say something like this, you have probably ended your career and damaged the company you represent beyond repair. Now, fortunately, this didn't exactly go viral, and it was pretty easy to blame just one person over at the company. You saw the CEO of THQ Nordic apologizing for this, and I think that apology went over very well. And I don't think a lot of gamers even really heard about this, so I don't think it's going to really affect game sales, but it might affect game reviews because it was mostly gaming journalists who were upset about this. They were the folks that developed Darksider Genesis after all. And when we take a look at the Metacritic scores, it did pretty well with an 8.0 user score and a 78. So I think this will always be associated with THQ Nordic, but I don't think it did that much damage. But I think it's worth a mention. Next up, we have my game of the year, Borderlands 3. But Borderlands 3 definitely had its share of issues. Probably the biggest PR blunder was the one where Randy Pitchford, during the reveal of the game, said that this game would have no microtransactions, and then kind of tried to clarify that by saying they might sell skins, they might sell helmets or hats or things along that lines, but there would be no microtransactions. And I think it was pretty clear what Randy meant when he said that they weren't going to fleece you, they weren't going to charge for gameplay, but he did want to leave the possibility that they might actually sell a helmet or a skin here or there. And I feel like maybe that was a bad choice. I feel like going into it just saying we will sell DLC and only DLC would have been a much better choice. The message would have been a lot clearer. But that wasn't the only thing that we saw Randy Pitchford getting blamed for last year. We saw an associate of his blaming him for a violent assault, blaming him for money laundering. Of course, that stuff was dismissed by a court, but still, that stuff was still said online, and it follows the game and the company. I mean, these accusations actually got so messy. At one point, Randy admitted that he took the company to medieval times, and while he was there, he left a USB stick that had pornography on it, but also had sensitive information about Borderlands 3 and the company on it as well. And then there was the $12 million bonus, and there was just so much stuff that led up to Borderlands 3. It really poisoned people's opinion of the game before they even played it. And don't forget, to make matters worse, this game was exclusive for the first 6 months on PC to the Epic Store, and because of that, it caused a lot of people to just turn away from the game, but they would still pay attention to the controversies. Now, at the end of the day, Borderlands 3 did fine. I think it'll continue to do fine. And I think Gearbox is probably going to be okay. That's why this didn't make it to the main list. But for the most part, Gearbox is now synonymous with Randy Pitchford, and Randy Pitchford is now, unfortunately, synonymous with a lot of the negativity that surrounds him, especially when it comes to pundits like Jim Sterling, who just rails on that guy every chance he gets. I don't think that's going away anytime soon. Then there's the curious case of Game Freak. Leading up to Pokemon Sword and Shield, and I think this was one of the most anticipated games of all time, especially for a Pokemon game. And Game Freak really had to put in the work to get those expectations met. Unfortunately, they absolutely did not do that, and as screenshots and gameplay started leaking, people started making fun of the graphics and some of the new Pokemon and other things. But the biggest issue Game Freak faced was the decision to only include 400 Pokemon in the base version, not including the national Pokédex, so you can't even trade in those Pokemons from other game. A lot of people felt that maybe they were going to sell us DLC that included the national Pokédex, and as of this morning, and what made me decide to film this video today, was the fact that they announced that's what they're going to do. But now when it comes to this expansion pass, let me go ahead and say that it looks like a pretty decent value. Obviously, you are going to get the additional Pokemon and the ability to catch those additional Pokemon, but you're also getting brand new stories with brand new legendaries and brand new areas to explore and new raids and new other stuff. And for a company that almost always double dips and then quadruple dips by creating a new version of a game they just released, instead of doing that, they're going to be releasing these expansions for the base game. So instead of buying the game again and playing it through again, you get 2 new adventures, and you also get access to all of those Pokemon. And it looks like they've done it in a relatively satisfying way, because even if you don't buy the expansions, you can still trade for those Pokemon. You just can't catch them and can't go to those new areas. If you use Pokemon Home, you can transfer those Pokemon into your account and still play with them in the base version of the game. So it's a bit of a compromise, but if you ask me, they're still definitely selling you what they left out of the Pokédex. Just, someone else has to pay for it and then trade it to you. Or you can trade them from other games you've already paid for. And then finally on the list, I want to talk a little bit about 2K games, and I think they're going to be just fine, but they were connected with the whole Gearbox Randy Pitchford stuff, since they published Borderlands 3, and then the 2K Sports group, those folks over there also had this terrible trailer that showed absolutely 100% gambling in their NBA 2K20 game, and this stuff just did not go over well. Microtransactions have always been associated with gambling. Loot crates or loot boxes have always been connected with gambling, and now you have something like this where there's actual wheels and slot machines and stuff where you can win credits, you can win cards. I mean, this did not play well and further damaged the folks over at 2K's reputation. But that's not even the worst game they made this year, even if it was their worst decision. But 2K was also the company that published the horribly broken and horribly buggy, even completely unplayable on the first day of the year, WWE 2K20. And there's a lot of different reasons I've heard that this happened. Like 2K obviously wants to have a yearly game for their sports franchises, and I've heard that Vince McMahon insisted that this game get released because he wants to also have a yearly published game. But this probably damaged 2K's reputation quite a bit. And on top of that, it definitely damaged the franchise for WWE wrestling games by quite a lot. I don't think I would trust next year's game until it's well reviewed, and I'm not picking up this one until it's under like $5. So there you go. There's 5 more companies that have damaged their reputation back in 2019. And again, this is nowhere near as bad as the original 5 that we looked at. And I do think even the original 5 has a chance of recovering by continuing to make good games and by continuing to treat their customer base correctly. And I hope that they choose to do that. The companies on this list have a much better chance of doing that. All they have to do is just kind of stop screwing up, like me. But that's just one man's opinion. I could be wrong. Guys, as always, thanks for watching. I love you very much, and I'll speak with you again soon.